the giant tortoise. If you want to find an animal famous for ridiculous longevity, look no further. Because we have here with us the giant tortoise. Species from places like the Galapagos Islands and the Seychelles can regularly live beyond 100 years, with some exceeding 150 years. And then there's Jonathan. Jonathan is a Seychelles giant tortoise living on St. Helena. He is believed to have been born around 1832, which means he has been alive for more than 190 years. Awesome. Think about that. Jonathan was already alive before the invention of the modern telephone, before cars became widespread, before airplanes, before television, before the internet. And Jonathan is still here, just casually eating vegetables. Probably hoping to beat the Bowhead Whale in the lifespan battle, and maybe go even further, who knows. Tortoises have incredibly slow metabolisms. Their bodies aren't constantly burning enormous amounts of energy. They don't chase prey. They don't have to maintain a high body temperature like mammals. And they can survive periods when food is limited. They're basically designed for easy does it, and their lifestyle reflects that. They don't need to run everywhere. They don't need to hunt. They don't need to constantly fight. They just exist, slowly, for a very long time. Bowhead whales. Meet one of the longest-lived mammals on Earth. The bowhead whale. These enormous whales live in Arctic and subarctic waters, and they can live for more than 200 years. That's incredible for a mammal, because mammals generally don't have the extreme lifespans seen in some reptiles, fish, and invertebrates. But bowhead whales, these guys are different. They're huge, and size can provide some protection from predators. Adult bowhead whales are enormous animals. They can weigh many tons and have thick layers of blubber to survive freezing Arctic waters. They also have extremely slow life histories. They grow slowly, they mature late, and they reproduce relatively slowly. In other words, they're not trying to speed-run life. They're playing the long game, which is kind of fascinating because large animals sometimes show something called the longevity advantage. The bigger you are, the harder it can be for predators to kill you. And if you're difficult to kill, you have more opportunity to live longer. Of course, being huge doesn't make you immortal. Humans have historically hunted bowhead whales heavily, but healthy adult bowheads have few natural predators. The Greenland shark. Aham! Now we're getting serious. Say hello to the Greenland shark. And this is currently regarded as the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. In other words, the longest-lived animal with a backbone that we know of. Scientists have estimated that Greenland sharks can live for several centuries, with the oldest individuals potentially reaching around 400 years. Nature, come on! Seriously! A Greenland shark born around the early 1600s could theoretically have been swimming around while Shakespeare was still relatively recent history. The telescope was still a new technology. And the United States didn't exist yet. And the shark? Just swimming. Slowly. Very slowly. These guys are famous for their incredibly sluggish swimming speed. They're adapted to extremely cold Arctic and North Atlantic waters, and cold temperatures slow down their metabolism. Which brings us to another recurring theme: slow metabolism. Greenland sharks live in some of the coldest waters inhabited by sharks. Their bodies are adapted to extremely low temperatures. They grow incredibly slowly, and they reach sexual maturity at an extremely old age. Researchers have estimated that some may not reproduce until they're around 150 years old or more. Whoa! Imagine going through puberty and waiting another century before becoming an adult. We barely wait until we're 18. Meanwhile, Greenland sharks are basically saying, "Yup, 132 years to go. Try putting yourself in its shoes, or its fins, I don't know." The ocean quahog. This is a marine clam that lives in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. And some of these clams can live for more than 500 years. In fact, one famous individual was nicknamed Ming. Scientists estimated Ming to be around 507 years old. Seriously, what's with these animals? Funny enough, the clam was named Ming because it was estimated to have been born during China's Ming dynasty. So while humans were busy building castles, fighting wars, and arguing about who should be king, Ming was apparently just there waiting to see how it goes. Because, nature promised it 500 years. Clams have growth rings in their shells. Basically, they can leave behind a record of their growth, much like tree rings can tell us about a tree's age. Scientists can examine the shell and count these growth bands. And that's how scientists can estimate the age of these incredibly old clams. But imagine being the scientist who discovers a clam and then realizes, this thing is older than my entire country? And just like we said before, cold water helps. Ocean quahogs have relatively slow metabolisms. They're also not running around trying to catch anything. They're filter feeders. They simply process water, collect food, and continue existing. For centuries. They're basically the biological equivalent of leaving your computer on sleep mode for 500 years. Glass sponge. This one doesn't even look like an animal. The glass sponge. And yes, it is actually an animal. It just doesn't have a face, or a brain, or a heart. Not even a skeleton like ours. Instead, many glass sponges have intricate skeletons made largely from silica, essentially a form of glass. And some species living in the deep ocean may have extraordinarily long lifespans. Estimates for certain glass sponges have reached thousands of years, with some often cited at around 10,000 to 15,000 years. Think about that. A creature could potentially be alive for thousands of years, while entire civilizations rise and fall around it. Imagine being a sponge and watching humanity go from, "Look, we invented farming," to, "Look, Wi-Fi." And the sponge is just sitting there thinking, these guys are so slow. And you want to know why they live this long? Part of the answer is their lifestyle. These deep-sea sponges generally live in extremely cold environments. They don't chase prey. They don't run. They don't even have to think very much. They're filter feeders. Water passes through their bodies, and they capture tiny particles and microorganisms from it. Their metabolism can be incredibly slow. And when you live in an environment where energy is limited, being slow isn't necessarily a disadvantage. In fact, it might be one of the secrets to extreme longevity. The glass sponge isn't trying to win a race. It's basically saying, I'll get there, eventually. Even if eventually means 14,000 years from now. Turritopsis Dohrnii, brace yourself. We've reached the most ridiculous animal on this list. It's tiny. It's a jellyfish. And it may have discovered something that sounds like a biological cheat code. Meet Turritopsis Dohrnii, often called the immortal jellyfish. Yeah, immortal. Hold on. Before you start thinking, finally, humans can become immortal. Chill out. Take off the lab coat, Dr. Maniac. We're not there yet. So, most animals have a life cycle that goes roughly like this. Born, grow, become an adult, age, die. Simple. But this guy can do something extremely unusual. When it is injured, starving, or under certain forms of environmental stress, it can transform its adult cells and return to an earlier developmental stage. Like, for reals. Instead of continuing toward death, it can reverse its life cycle. It literally says, I'm not done yet, and then clicks on the reset button. An adult jellyfish can transform back into a polyp, and from there, the life cycle can begin again. It's like a butterfly going back into a caterpillar. Imagine a butterfly becoming an adult, then getting injured, and instead of dying, it somehow turns back into a caterpillar, then grows into a butterfly again, and repeats the process. That's roughly the level of biological weirdness we're dealing with. Scientists call this process transdifferentiation, but I'm pretty sure that's just a fancy name for hacking nature. Yep, cells that have already specialized can change into different types of cells, and the jellyfish can essentially reset its developmental state. But its immortality doesn't go beyond that. The jellyfish is often called biologically immortal because it can potentially reverse its development instead of undergoing normal aging in the usual way. But that doesn't mean it can never die. It can still be eaten, killed by disease, killed by environmental changes, physically destroyed, or simply fail to survive. So it's not, this animal literally cannot die. It's more like, this animal has an extraordinary ability to potentially restart its life cycle. Huge difference. But still super cool.